How's it going, everybody? My name is Max, and today we're reading some Aristotle, the Metaphysics, the Penguin edition, translated by Hugh Lawson Tancred. And Aristotle is a very interesting philosopher. He is, of course, the student of Plato, if I'm correct. And the Metaphysics is a very important book, particularly if you want to understand Hegel, German idealism, any of the Christian thinkers, Thomas Aquinas. So, like the other book I'm reading, Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, I'm going to be reading basically this book cover to cover, each section by section. So I'm going to start on page 3. I'm going to skip the introduction and just get straight into Aristotle. Now, this book, the Penguin book, has some great sort of guide before you read the actual work by Aristotle. There's another good book, which is a guide by Vasilis Politis. It's by Routledge. It's Aristotle's Metaphysics, and it's a great introduction to the metaphysics, and it's a great exposition. I studied under Vasilis in Trinity College in Dublin, so he's a great philosopher, and if you're looking for a good guide, that's a great book to get. Okay, Alpha 1. The book opens by broaching a topic which is to be of recurring concern throughout the work. What is the nature of philosophy? We can make some progress with this question. Aristotle's assume if we can determine what it is that is the proper object of philosophical interest. This, in a way, is easy to do. The philosopher can be said boldly to be someone interested in the acquisition of wisdom. However, this does not, of course, get us much further. We need to know what wisdom is and how, if at all, it can be acquired by our limited human capacities. The first of these two questions is answered in this first chapter, and the second throughout the course of the work. Aristotle approaches the question of the nature of wisdom indirectly, by drawing a contrast between two fundamentally different forms of cognition, which are between them constitutive of our cognitive handling of the world. On the one hand, we have direct experience of particular objects and events, but on the other, we are in certain circumstances able to derive general propositions from our experience of particulars, which go beyond the content of any thoughts about particulars. The capacity for the latter form of knowledge is something that Aristotle thinks we owe to the possession of an art or science. And this distinction is also crucial for illustrating the nature of wisdom, which turns out to be a special sort of science. It is a peculiarity of the distinction that, whereas experience may often be more helpful in practice than art or science, it is the latter two which are always accorded the greater prestige. This is because it is felt, a general assumption, with which Aristotle by no means disagrees, that knowledge of universals is somehow higher or more valuable than that of particular things. And the kind of universal knowledge that is most valuable of all is that connected with the fundamental causes and principles of all things. Since it is agreed that wisdom is the highest science, it must be such things that constitute its domain. Philosophy is thus the search for the most fundamental causes and principles of the most general aspects of the world. As already suggested, this exercise will be of little practical value, and it will be impossible to determine whether the philosopher has succeeded in his search by seeing whether he is thereby better at any practical, productive, or technical task. He will, if he has been successful, rather have achieved a state of intrinsic value. Philosophy is supremely useless and supremely elevating. One mark that can be held to indicate real progress in philosophy or in any abstract study is, however, the ability to teach what one has learned. Aristotle clearly considers that a philosopher who did not teach would be a contradiction in terms. Certainly, there have not been sufficient major philosophers who have refrained from disseminating their views to give the lie to this claim. Okay, so there we have the sort of introduction to this Alpha 1. And now I'm going to read 980A on page 4. By nature, all men long to know, an indication of their delight in the senses, for these, quite apart from the utility, are intrinsically delightful, and that through the eyes more than the others. For it is not only with a view to action, but also when we have no intention to do anything, that we choose, so to speak, sight higher than all the others. And the reason for this is that sight is the sense that especially produces cognition in us and reveals many distinguishing features of things. Now the animals in general are by nature possessed of senses, but of them some do not also have memory, though others do. 980B. And so the latter are more intelligent and capable of learning than those that are not capable of remembering, whereas those that are not able to hear sounds are intelligent without being able to learn. The bee and other such kind of animals that there may be. Learning is reserved for those that, in addition to memory, also have the sense of hearing. For other animals live by their imaginings and recollections, with only a small share of experience, whereas mankind lives also by his skill and calculations. But it is from memory that men derive their experience. For many recollections of the same thing perform the function of a single experience. Indeed, it is thought that experience is more or less similar to knowledge and skill. 98.1a. And that men acquire knowledge and skill through experience. As Paulus so rightly says, experience produces skill, inexperience, chance. Now, the circumstances in which a skill arises are that from the many cases of thinking in experience, a single general assumption is formed in connection with similar things. For instance, to have the assumption that when Callias is ill with such and such a disease, such and such a medicine is appropriate, and similarly for Socrates and for many others individually is a matter of experience. But the knowledge that for all such people, defined by species, when ill with such a disease, such a medicine is beneficial belongs to a skill. However, in regard to practice, experience is not thought to be different at all from skill. In fact, we rather observe those with experience being practically successful than those who, without experience, have a theoretical understanding. This is because experience is the knowledge of particulars, and skill that of universals, and practical actions, like all occurrences, are concerned with particulars. For it is not a man that the practicing doctor cures except accidentally, but rather Callias or Socrates or some other of those thus named, to whom being a man is accidental. If then one were to have a theoretical account without experience, knowing the universal but being ignorant of the immediate particular, he will often err in his treatment, for it is the particular that must be treated. And yet we think that knowledge and expertise belong rather to skill than experience, and we assume that the skilled are wiser than the experienced, in that it is more in connection with knowledge that wisdom is associated with anything. And the reason for this, the reason for this is that the skilled know the cause, whereas the experienced do not. For the experienced know the that, but not the because, whereas the skilled have a grasp of the because, the cause. This is why in each field designers are thought more prestigious and to have more knowledge than craftsmen and to be wiser. 98.1b. In that they know the causes for what is being done, The assumption is that it is not being practical that makes them wiser, but their possession of an account and their grasp of the causes. And in general, the ability to teach is a distinguishing mark between the knowledgeable and the ignorant man. And that is why we think that skill is rather a form of knowledge and experience. For the skilled can, whereas the merely experienced cannot teach. Furthermore, we do not think that any of these senses is wisdom, even those that are the most important forms of cognition at the level of particulars. They do not, though, give the reason for anything, as why fire is hot, but merely indicate that it is hot. And so, it would not be surprising if the first man to discover some skill or other beyond the common sense was admired by other men, not only because of the utility of some of what he discovered, but as being wise and above the herd. For when several skills have been discovered, some having to do with necessity and some with indulgence, it is reasonable that the practitioners of the latter were always more admired than those of the former, because of the uselessness of their knowledge. Hence, indeed, it was that when all such arts had been discovered, those arts were discovered which had to do neither with pleasure nor with necessity. And this happened first in those places where men had leisure. That is why it was in Egypt that the mathematical sciences were first developed, for their leisure was available to the priestly caste. And so, as we said above, the man of experience is thought to be wiser than the man who has just any perception of a subject. The craftsman wiser than the man of experience, the designer wiser than the artisan, and the theoretical sciences wiser than the productive ones. 98.2a. It is clear, then, that wisdom is knowledge having to do with certain principles and causes. So that's book Alpha 1 from Aristotle's Metaphysics. It's a pretty affordable book if you want to go and buy it and read along. And I'll be putting up more readings of Aristotle's Metaphysics soon. Also Kant, and I plan to do Hegel. Yeah, Kant, Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, and yeah, maybe a few others. Take care.